I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast. This is a show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today I'm joined by Miss Julie Barth. She is a writer, mother of 6, a trauma survivor, and founder of the Colin James Barth Outreach, which is a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women-led households in times of crisis. She also has a memoir out now, available, called Notes from a Blackberry, which is a deeply moving account of love, loss, and resilience, chronicling her journey as a special needs parent while navigating the heartbreaking realities of her first husband's battle with cancer. So she's here today to tell us a little bit about her story and to share some insight about her journey. So I would like to give a huge welcome to Julie. Thank you for joining me today.
I know. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So if you could just tell me a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. As you said, I'm the mother of 6. I'm a professional writer, so I write for other people as well as being an author. And about 6 months ago, I opened up a charity called the Colin James Barth Outreach, and it's an organization that's dedicated to helping women-led households that hit crisis, whatever that looks like for the individual. Um, when I was in my 30s, I had married my high school sweetheart. And after we got back together after college, we had our first son and kind of moved back to the same suburbs that we met in and wanted to expand on our family. So I had a couple miscarriages, but then I got pregnant with my daughter. Right from the get go, she just failed to grow. Like, I would go in and they would measure her at 6 weeks. And then at 10 weeks, they were still measuring her at 6 weeks. And it got to be like almost 12 weeks before, kind of all the flags started going off, like something's not right in all of this. But, we had 40 some ultrasounds, and no matter, like, even though she wouldn't grow, she was proportionate. She didn't have any genetic markers. We actually had an amniocentesis that came back completely okay. So, it was just kind of a guessing game. Like, I would go in and see a specialist and they would throw out, well, she's going to have a syndrome where she's going to come out and not be able to breathe. It's just one thing after another after another. So at about 37 weeks, I think they looked at me and knew that I couldn't keep pace with it anymore. It was just like one devastating thing after another. And so they delivered her. And when they did, they weren't prepared for her size because they were measuring her wrong. And she was only 3.5 pounds when they thought she was about 5.5. So the hospital she was delivered at just didn't have the capabilities for her. So she ended up with the trach and all sorts of, we knew that she had some global thing that led to her being small, but everything after she was born really could be traced back to, medical malpractice or something. It was like every time we would go, something weird would happen where I'd bring her in for like a cold. And the next thing I knew, she was, flatlining for one reason or another. So that went on for about 3 years. We went from hospital to hospital, just trying to not so much, I laid off of the whole what's wrong with her theory and just kind of had a mindset of, let's just make sure that we're treating whatever we can right now and leave the rest of it kind of alone. And hopefully it'll unveil itself. So she had a couple surgeries and her throat had to be reconstructed because of the damage. And when she was about 3, I started taking her out into public, and people would walk up to me and say, "Is that your daughter on the Discovery Channel show?" And I hadn't seen it. So, my answer was just no, like, I don't know what you're talking about. So that kind of sat, just kind of weird with me because I had no idea what they were talking about. It just wasn't one person. Then one of my best friends called and she said that, I know what has. And she told me what it was, and it was early 2000. So I got on the internet and I searched up primordial dwarfism, and up pop. It was like she has, very distinct features, and she had a very difficult background, which all of it is chronicled. But the thing with primordial dwarfism is there's no genetic marker for it. So it's not as if we ran in her genetics and we could have gotten it back. It was just a matter of they diagnose it from her size, from her background. So to be honest, I don't know that she's ever been formally diagnosed with it, but she's 24 now and she's still 24 pounds and less than 4 feet. So we just kind of taken that as what she has. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter globally what she has. I've always been kind of like, let's just make sure her life is what it can be while she's here. So I try not to get too bogged down by, expectations of what to expect as she's growing older. So right as she was about getting better, we had her throat reconstructed, and my husband Colin he worked down at the Board of Trade, and he just started being very distant, wasn't acting himself at all. And we had proceeded to have 2 more children. So we had 4 in total. The youngest was 6 months. Our oldest was 10, and was sandwiched in between there. And we're having this huge party. So I told him, he was back and forth to the doctor. So I said, just go to the hospital. Don't come home until you figure out what's going on. Like, obviously, someone needs to get to the bottom of this. So within about 4 hours, I went to the hospital, and we found out that he had a mass on his pancreas and several lesions in his liver. So at that point, with just the 4 small kids, they said, just take him home. He has 2 weeks to live, and let him say goodbye. So that's not how it ended up. He ended up living 16 months. Some of them were a blessing, others not so much. And then he passed away in 2009. So that is what Notes from a Blackberry is about. My memoir. It's because I would take him down to chemo on Thursdays, and because he was so sick, I just started writing Tatum's story because it was such a like roller coaster ride, and I was just coming off of all these weird things that had happened, like anything that could have gone wrong did. And I also wanted it flowed into Colin, and since we had 4 small kids, I wanted them to get to know him because I did not, was fearful that he wasn't going to be around. So um, I it sat on my notebook for about 12 years, and I went through a second situation where I decided that I would read it. And after I did, I thought it really is something that hopefully people going through caregiving situations and in all of these kind of like crisis fire alarms, maybe what I wrote down and what I had to say and my feelings can lend some comfort to a lot of people out there that feel like they're the only ones going through something, or give a little bit of insight to people who have other people in their lives who are going through crises. Because, you never know how you're going to act until you're there, but you always think you know how you would act. So, my hope is just, first of all, to tell of courage throughout all of their trials, but also kind of this a global insight into, what goes on behind closed doors when you're caring for somebody who's terminally ill. And, it's just, you don't know it because you can't be there. And it seems to go very fast from the outside, but when you're stuck in it, it's almost like the whole world stops moving. So
Wow, that's such
that's a
a
little bit.
impactful story. What has helped you the most during those darkest moments?
Um, Well, so the first situation happened, and the second situation kind of was like a carry over into it, where I got into a very abusive relationship. So there were very dark times in both of them, but I can honestly say that my kids are really the thing that picked me out of whatever grief or fire drill or, sadness I was sticking in. I kind of knew, I wanted my children to have whatever normal, childhood looks like, and for them to not be surrounded in sadness. So they definitely kept me going and made me realize that even if things are, looking dire, um, you still have to look around and see the blessings in the day to day, because otherwise you're just constantly in survival mode. So
What are some unique challenges parents that have children with special needs face both emotionally and logistically?
I think being a special needs parent, for me at least, you feel very isolated because you want, all of a sudden it's like everybody else, all the other parents your age are getting together and they have kids that don't require any special needs, and they're just, you look from the, outside, and you just see how freeing their lives are and how much freedom they have that they don't even understand. And you kind of feel like you just don't fit in anymore. It's like the normal things that people are talking about, whether that was milestones. No, my child sat up at a year, or my child, you can't join in those conversations anymore. Mostly because you're just tired of that entire talk, because that's what your world revolves around is PT, OT, doctor's appointments, pulmonologists, gastroenterologists. So, it's like you need a full-time planner just to figure out what therapy your kid needs any given day. And then there's the illnesses, and so I think, you're constantly trying to fit into a world that you no longer fit into, and you want the best for your child and for any other siblings they have. And you just try and make do. And I think from the outside, we try and make it look like it's a lot easier than it actually is, and maybe get used to it a little bit. But we can also see, I can see the goodness pretty much in anything, because when your days are really dark, I think you start searching a little bit more to find those, pockets of happiness. And you don't need a whole lot. It's like if you're starved and somebody feeds you, a carrot to somebody else, that might look like, oh, it's just a carrot. But as a special needs parent, when your child does something that might be, commonplace to everybody else, it's a big deal. And you tend to keep it inside because you don't want to stand out all the time. Sometimes you just like to go to a party and be normal. Sometimes you just like to like turn your kid over at the pool and not one, worry that they're gonna fall in, or every parent has that. But for a special need parent, it just never stops. You get to the next stage, but the next stage is still more requiring than what average kids go through. So
What are some misconceptions people typically have about grief and how it unfolds over time?
I think that people believe that grief is almost like a once and done thing, or that you can get to the end. We all know, well, most of us know about the seven stages of grief, but when you examine what we all kind of tend to think we know about grief, that book actually was not written for caregivers or the people left here on earth. Stages of Grief was written for terminally ill patients, and that is what the terminally ill patients go through, these stages. I think that people have a misconception that caregivers are going along with the same grief as the terminally ill person. The problem I see in that whole thought process is, by the time Colin had passed away, I had watched 16 months. I lost a little bit of them every single day. And so when people are just starting to grieve, I have been grieving for so long that I couldn't sit in it anymore. And I wasn't prepared to, unpack all of it. And I think that, again, when you are uncomfortable around people, or when you have a uncomfortable situation, you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to keep bringing other people down. But that leads to a whole lot of isolation that you don't talk about. And I think that it tends to push people away. And then you start like kind of pulling away. So it's just a really odd dynamic where I think a lot of people feel as if someone is, stuck in a caregiver role or crisis, that they want to be left alone and nobody wants to bother them. And, from the inside, it feels like everybody's moving along and just forgetting about you. And you don't really understand that you could be hard to be around sometimes because you're so, grief stricken. So I think there's just a duality of misunderstandings on both sides that leads to a lot of isolation and loneliness that doesn't really stop at any given point, and there is no end point to it. I still he's been gone 15 years, and it still could be, I'm walking around somewhere and a smell will just, take you right back to it. So as much healing as you do, there's always relapses, there's always memories, and they just never go away.
One huge misconception I have about it is I lost my grandmother when I was 15, when I was back in 2017, and I feel like I haven't fully grieved yet. And I think some people think that just because you haven't had grief yet and haven't cried about it yet shows that you weren't really compassionate about them. And that's typically
Yeah.
not true. I loved my grandmother with all my heart, and it's just, I just haven't had that moment. I've had brief instances of sadness where I do break down, but I just haven't had like a full breakdown yet. And I think, and other people say, well, grief hits immediately and that you that it goes away quickly. And so I think that is, and I also agree with you that even just like a certain memory or a smell or just a show could come on that reminds you of them, and then it just triggers something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that, we all have to come to the table because people often ask me, like, well, if you had stopped and processed, or if you had, I think that the brain has a way of protecting you from your own feelings until it knows that you're prepared to deal with it. And in these heavy situations, where, it's a complete loss, I think some of us can just say, yeah, I can't deal with that right now. So I'm just going to put it away. It's just easier to say, I'll deal with that tomorrow. And I think you're right from the outside. I think there was an impression that, I was moving on too quickly, or I didn't really care. And that, I think, hurt me more than anything else, for people to think that I didn't care.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of judgment that's going on. Mostly, I'm sure that I judge myself more harshly than anybody else out there, but it did feel as if everyone was looking to me like, well, is she moving on? Is she out too much tonight? Does she, and I felt like it was this constant, like, Julie watch, let's see when she actually falls apart. And I am not about falling apart. Like, I am a very controlled person, or at least I used to be. And I only wanted people to see what I wanted them to see. And I think that, gave everyone this impression that was not true about what was going on in my inside voice.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you about judging yourself a lot because there were a lot of times where I thought, is this normal that I'm not grieving? Is this normal? So when you said like judging yourself, I thought, oh, that was me 100%. And I still do that to this day. I still look at it as like, did I move on too quickly? And you do have to put on like a certain image because sometimes you don't want to talk about it and you want to make sure you want to kind of let people know that or show that you are okay and
Yeah.
you just don't really want to talk about it. Um, Talking about your second marriage brought like an entirely different kind of hardship. What were some subtle signs of emotional and financial abuse that people often overlook?
I get that question a lot about, what red flags to look for. And the best advice, or the best, from the outside perspective, that I can give to people is, I don't think that anybody has a hard time recognizing red flags. That's why they're there. Like, your house has a house alarm, your car has a car alarm, your body says something's not right here. I think the biggest problem in relationships is, they don't come into your life and say, hey, listen, I'm going to put you in a situation where you won't be able to pay your bills, I'm going to treat your children horribly, I'm going to call you names. They don't, nobody puts that kind of stuff. You put your best face forward when you get into a relationship, and it's so subtle until it's not. And by that point, I think the biggest thing is just to listen to your gut, and if your head's saying something is not right, as hard as it is, act on it. Don't keep dismissing it, because the more you dismiss it, the more you normalize it and you make it okay. And then they have to get nastier to keep you in control. So it's this constant, like, overstepping boundaries, starting again, stepping over them, starting again. And you become very good at just, like, trying to live in the moment. And you forget about all the ways in which, you can't turn left, right, or anywhere else. And they put you into this box. So I think the thing is to just really, don't dismiss if something doesn't feel like it's making sense. don't just automatically assume it's you, because that as women, I think even, probably more so, we all feel as if it's our duty to keep everyone okay and to keep families together and situations okay. And we end up making a lot of excuses for people that maybe don't act exactly how we want them to. So I think it's more not about, if somebody pretends or if somebody is treating you a specific way, don't assume that their behavior isn't exactly how they're thinking. No matter what they're saying, their actions tell you everything, regardless of what their mouth is saying.
Looking back, what do you wish you had known about protecting yourself emotionally and financially in a relationship?
I was brought up in a family, in a household where my mother stayed home, my dad worked. So they had joint accounts. They just shared everything. And although, they didn't have the most perfect marriage, it was what I knew. So when Colin and I got together, we did the same thing. I didn't work. Well, I did. I was raising our children and he did. So I just always assumed that he would be there, and I think everyone wants to assume that their loved one is going to be there, that there's no such thing as illness, that there's no such thing as not knowing someone until you find out too late. But I think as women, it's important for us to protect ourselves. And it's not selfish to have your own account, you know? And it's also not, I think people have this impression that if you have a backup plan, it's almost as if you don't trust the original one, meaning that we have all these people going into sports careers, professional sports, and we're all like, but you need a backup plan, you need to protect yourself. But yet we don't say that to women who stay home with their children, like you need a backup plan because he might not always be there or something might go wrong. And we tend not to tell women to make sure that they're okay, put money aside, that it's not selfish for them to want things of their own, to be independent, to make decisions on their own. Think we tend to always defer to whoever we're with that we find support in. And that's great. And I love it. And I had a fantastic marriage the first time around. Had he lived, we probably would have had a fantastic life together. But unfortunately, you can't control situations. You can only control your situation.
Many women feel ashamed or hesitant to leave unhealthy relationships, and even when you can, even when you personally can see that the relationship that your friend has is not great, that it's hard for them to understand and see what you're trying to see. What can you change? How can you change the conversation around that and try to kind of make them aware of their surroundings?
I think the hardest thing is when you're in an emotionally, economically, or financially abusive situation, you feel responsible because ultimately that relationships don't just happen um, because of one person. There's never one person to blame. There's always two people in any scenario. And if you come forward and you say what's been going on in your house, you not only have to admit that you let it go on, you have to show that you were a participant in it. I did some pretty crazy things trying to save a relationship that was toxic as any relationship can be. But that doesn't mean that I get to, just gloss over the things that I did because I made decisions that kept my children in bad situations. I did a lot of dumb things. I didn't protect myself. I didn't protect them. And it's really easy when to blame yourself when you make a decision and it doesn't go the way that you want it to, and to think, oh, that was really dumb. But the thing about decisions is that if you make them with goodness in your heart, with all the information that you are presented with at that time, regardless of whether it goes the way you want or whether it doesn't, that doesn't make the decision itself stupid. It just means that you made the decision you did, probably not knowing all these outlining factors. So I think we tend to blame ourselves and feel like it's our responsibility to fix it, to make it right, to go back and try and work through it. The phrase fighting for a relationship just strikes me as like all the wrong things to think about. You should never have to fight for a relationship. A relationship should be supportive and available. And if it's not, then it's probably not the best thing for you. So hindsight, I think that it's important to recognize that sometimes you do have to, expose yourself and all the ugly thing you've done and move past it and lose a lot of stuff in the interim, whether that's friends or your house or your car. It's gone already. You can't do anything about it, and to continue to just keep it on because you're so afraid of losing whatever's keeping you stuck. Just the relationships will never be okay. They're not healthy. There's nothing you can do to fix them, and you can stay in it for a lifetime and be miserable, or you can just cut your losses, know that you did it, it made those decisions with the best intentions, and just move forward and trying to find happy outside of that.
How can women in crisis take their first steps toward gaining stability and independence?
I think a lot of times in economically, financially, and emotionally abusive relationships, you're so beaten down. The person you're with has done a miraculous job of making you feel, stupid, dependent, very dependent. You question yourself, you question your surroundings, you question your friendships because all of a sudden you're being told that everyone you love doesn't love you back, or that people don't like you, just to like get at you and tear you down. Um, so I think there is a component where you really have to, first of all, not look at the enormity of the situation, because a lot, when I was thinking about leaving, I was like, I'm gonna have to get a job, I'm gonna lose insurance. And I looked at it like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And when you look at the enormity of something, it keeps you stuck. um, if I had done it differently, the minute I thought things were kind of not what I thought they should be, doing one small thing every day to, foster yourself, to make you feel better, to be successful at whatever it is that will push you to the next thing. And when you start re-examining all of the things that the person you're with is telling you, and find out that it's not true, then you can overcome a lot of what they're saying to you. But I think it just really, you have to have actionable plans along the way that are small, but they're significant. And when you start adding all those little small steps together, you will be amazed at how empowering it is. And you will look and see that, yes, I can do this on my own without this other person. In fact, I can do it successfully without them.
What does resilience look like when life continuously throws unexpected challenges your way?
Resiliency, I believe, is I think that we've all been in that situation where you just like get through it, in college exams, whatever, you have a mindset that I'm just going to push through it. And I think that a lot, that's part of resilience, but I think the other part too is to like not forget that even in dark times and even when you're going through hard things, there's still blessings to be found that kind of keep you going so that you're not just surviving. I think I went through 10 years of literally just trying to get through from one crisis to the next. Um, and I think the way that after it kept happening and happening, the way that I started realizing that I only have one life to live, and to hold my breath and wait until the next crisis is over and not acknowledge that I still have to live this life. Um, I think that's resilience, is being in it, knowing that you have to get through it and sucking it up, but at the same time, finding something for yourself and some piece of goodness that makes it more meaningful rather than meaningless.
Going back to your memoir about Nuts from a Blackberry, was it difficult to write that book?
It wasn't. The reason I never wrote it for anyone else to see it. I wrote it, to remember everything that Tatum went through, and also to, talk about Colin and his journey. So it wasn't difficult to write. It was probably difficult to read after, it sat on my notebook for 10 years, 12 years. Um, yeah, I think after I read it, I think it was difficult for me to recognize that, as crazy as that first book was, the crazy didn't even start until after we lost Colin in 2009. So, I got busy writing the second book really, really quickly, and was able to knock that one out pretty easily, because I had an understanding of, what I wanted to accomplish in writing it. So, I think it was somewhat cathartic, and I'm glad I did it, because even when I was reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that happened. There were just so many things that the brain, tries to bury, I guess, so you don't have to feel the pain of it. But in doing that, you forget a whole lot of things that I think are important to remember about life and situations.
What's the number one thing that you want readers to take away from reading the memoir?
I hope that people who are in that situation, if they're reading it, recognize that they need to give themselves a little more grace. A lot of people have reached out to me and said, like, I hope you're not being so hard on yourself anymore, because the memoirs are, they're very honest, they're very authentic, and I pretty much open up my inside voice to the world to let them know about all of the things that you say and all the things that you do when you're faced with impossible situations. So I think when people ask me, like, I hope you're giving yourself a break, I hope that the people reading it will give themselves a break, knowing that if you're reading my memoir and you're thinking, wow, this woman is really, trying her hardest and doing so much for everyone else, that they'll look around and see that too. Because I think we get so focused on the things that we can't do, like not being able to, save our loved ones from suffering or save them at all. Um, so that's my hope, is that caregivers who read it will give themselves, a little bit of breathing room, and also that people who have other people in their lives that are caregiving, that they have a new perspective you know, on how to kind of insert themselves instead of just walking away and doing the, oh, I don't want to bother them, or the proverbial, like, if you need anything, let me know. Those are all amazing and nice things. But when you're going through crisis, it's like one more thing that you can't handle. So I hope that people who read the book from the outside see that, instead of asking someone, what can you do? Just kind of look around, you can figure out what someone needs, and don't give them a choice, because they're probably not going to take you up on it unless you say, hey, listen, I'm going to the grocery store and I'm getting you something. So what is it? And just don't give them an option, because no one wants to feel indebted either. So I think just the lessons of, you know, everything that I was going through that I couldn't see, if someone saw from the outside, that they can make sense of it in their own lives and whatever they're going through.
Who have been some huge inspirations and who has helped you the most through your journey?
Um, I would say one of my biggest inspirations is my daughter, the one that has special needs. So not only did she have that rough start and, 40 some surgeries just to have her throat repaired, she lost her father. And then when we moved to North Carolina, she actually ended up getting cancer, which is completely unrelated to everything that she went through as a child. So, there are days when, so now she's a self-taught artist. She does everything she can, to make people's day bright. She'll send them pictures through the mail. And if you send her a picture, she'll, draw it for you. And she just keeps it, no matter how hard life has been for her, and it has been hard, one thing after another. She just keeps on trying over and over again. And I think anytime I feel as if I can't do something, or, poor me, all I have to do is look to her and recognize that she can make the best of her world. And she's been through a whole lot of stuff, and she really does not have much, but she makes the best of what she has. And I just think that anyone who's feeling sorry for themselves, or, feeling like they're down on their luck, to recognize that there are always people that are worse off than them, and just to, kind of take from their strength, because I do. I look at Tatum some days and I think I have no right to complain at all. And if she can find happiness and joy, then I should too.
How do you balance sharing personal, painful stories while also protecting your own emotional well-being?
Um, I don't know. I think that, the more you tell something, um, the more you say it, it it becomes less hurtful, I guess. So I think telling my story makes it, less meaningless. There's so many times, and I've been in situations that I'm like, oh my gosh, why do I have to do this? Like, me again? Like, wasn't this special needs enough? Wasn't the husband cancer? Was it, So I think that I just have a really good way to protect myself and barrel through things. Yeah, I don't really know. It's just kind of how I was born, I guess.
What advice do you have for people that are going through a very painful time, and what's helped you the most, or what's been the best piece of advice you've ever received as well?
I think that, as hard as it was for me, growing up, I think that I wish I would have taken people seriously when they said to not worry what people think about you. I'm a pleaser by nature, and I get very worried about what people think of me. So I think, growing up, I probably made a lot of decisions based on external things and what will people think. And I want people to like me. And I think when you strip all that stuff away and you just worry about you liking you and feeling good about who you are, the world becomes a lot less complex when you just worry about doing the right thing versus looking the right way. So I think that's the lesson that I wish I'd learned quicker that people told me about. And it's also the lesson that um, I wish I could give to other people is just to like stop worrying about how people judge you or what you've done, or if they have a problem with you and you haven't done anything wrong, then it's not your responsibility to find out why, what the problem is or why they don't like you, because whatever it is, it can't be about you if you haven't done anything.
For people that want to follow your story as well as check your book out, where all can they find you at? And please promote everything that you have going on.
Sure. So if you go to my website, which is juliebarthauthor.com, there's several tabs on there. So my daughter's art, it's called Hope Forte, which is HOPE 4, the number 4, TAYT.com. That's her art sales. And anything that you see on there, you can order and put on a mug, or it's custom. All of it is custom. So if you go to that website, and the proceeds from her art go to fund the Colin James Barth Outreach. Again, I spoke a bit earlier. We provide kind of like a concierge service to people women who are in crisis, and help them to kind of decode and get them the resources they need by breaking it all down and making actionable steps for them. So again, if you go to juliebarthauthor.com, you can see my books, my podcasts. There's some journaling done on there. And then there's a tab for Hope for Tate and the CJB outreach. So if you want to get in touch with me, please reach out on any of the websites. I'm the one manning it. So I'll be the person that's answering them. And that's pretty much where you can find out about me.
Well, Julie, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's such an inspirational story, and I think it's a story people need to know about. And I know people that have personally dealt with loss and have um, grief with their family that I think this episode really will help people. And as always, I will put her website in the description box of the episode so that it's an easy access so that you can click it right directly from the episode. As well, everything that she mentioned will be on there. Her book is on there, her podcast, interviews that she's done, and the what other hosts will be on there as well. To follow me, you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Lethal Venom Podcasts. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, Noah's Podcast on there. And as always, you can listen to Lethal Venom wherever you get your podcasts from, on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Pandora. Feel free to follow so you get notified of new episodes when they'll come out, as well as you'll get notified when this episode comes out. Um, Julie, thank you so much again for telling your story. I really have appreciated our conversation, and just thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it as well.
Well, for Julie and for me, I appreciate you all for joining me and listening to today's episode, and I will catch you all in the next episode of Lethal Venom.